Hey guys, welcome to Through the Bible Verse by Verse, a plain and simple study of the entire Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. We're in Judges chapter 20. I attempted to complete Judges chapter 20 at last study, but I didn't. There's a lot. Now, we're chapters 20 and 21 is the aftermath of a hideous crime that had taken place when a sinful priest took, we go back to the story, we remember his concubine. So again, everything about this story is just all wrong from the beginning. Everything. This concubine, the man had the concubine, she was unfaithful to him. She flees him and goes to her father. The man goes after her after 4 months, which is kind of weird because it starts off by saying that he really had affection for his concubine. So after 4 months, he goes after her to retrieve her. He spends some time with her father. Father is extremely hospitable. And in fact, every time he got ready to leave, his father was like, hey, stay again, have lunch, have this, whatever. And finally the man said, I'm going to leave. He left. Now, he left later in the day. So he did not make it home as he had planned. So as the night began to fall, he had bypassed the city of Jerusalem, which was called Jabez at the time. Jabez at the time, because he wanted to stay in a Israelite place, and that turned out to be disastrous. So he goes to the Benjamite city, and then the men of Benjamite, these particular men of Benjamite, they come out, they surrounded the city, and again, reminiscent of Sodom and Gomorrah. They come out and they demand that the guest host send the man out so they can have sex with the man. The man pleaded with them, not the man, take his concubine, take my daughters. And so we're going to see this perverted, twisted way of thinking. So they take the concubine, they raped her. The men in the city, they raped her all night to the point where in the morning she crawled to the threshing floor and died. Then the man all of a sudden just kind of like his heart just changed. Right? He came out, looked at her as she's lying dead on the threshold of the floor. Get up, he said. Get up, just get up. But she's dead, so he saddles her dead body and then goes back to his town, cuts her up into 12 pieces, and then sends them to all of the tribes of Israel. The tribe of Israel said, oh my God, what is going on? This is horrible. Now, again, it's important to understand that all of Israel was stepped in sin. All of them were just in sin. But they were like, but this is terrible, which was true. This was terrible, they said. So all of Israel came out. They said, okay, we got to do something about it. We got to punish the Benjamites. So the Benjamites, they came to the Benjamites and they said, hey, this horrible thing happened in one of your towns. Send out the men. But they stood by the man, those wicked men, and they actually then went to war. Now there was about 400,000 of all of Israelites that gathered to go to war against the Benjamites. But the Benjamites started slaughtering them with only like 26,000 soldiers. The Israelites asked, well, Lord, who should go up first? They said, well, Judah can go up first. Judah went up and I think it was 24, something like that, 1,000 died. They came back and go, man, what's going on right here? God, wow. I said, Lord, should we go up to fight? God said, yeah, go up to fight. The Benjamites slaughtered 18,000 of them. Now they're crying, and we're going to pick it up at this point. But now they're crying like, God, what's going on? And as I said, keep this in mind, that what is going on is the incredible sinfulness of the entire nation. From God's perspective, you say, this is all of y'all of this messed up. You're tripping over Benjamin, but all of y'all have messed up as a result that, these incredible slaughters. Now, let's pick it back up, because they have been defeated 3 times by the Benjamites, the wicked, perverted Benjamites. So, verse 26, it says, the whole Israelite army went to Bethel, where they wept and sat before the Lord. They fasted that day into the evening and offered burnt offerings and fellowship offerings to the Lord. The Israelites inquired of the Lord. In those days the ark of the covenant of God was there, and Phinehas the son of Eleazar, son of Aaron, was serving before it. Now these would be not the Phinehas and Eleazar that were the immediate successors. We're talking over 400 years. But remember, these were common names, but they were priests, okay, of the direct line of Aaron, just named after them. Okay, so it says, verse 28 again, and Phinehas and the son of Eleazar, son of Aaron, was serving before it. The Israelites asked, should we again fight against our brothers, the Benjamites, or should we stop? The Lord answered, fight. Right? You could probably think, oh my God, should we? He said, fight. He said, because I will hand them over to you tomorrow. So the Israelites set up an ambush around Gilbey, okay. And on the 3rd day, the Israelites fought against the Benjamites and took their battle positions against Gilbey as before. Then the Benjamites came out against the people who were drawn away from the city, and they began to attack the people before killing about 30 men of 30 men of Israel on the highway, one of which goes up to Bethel, and the other to Gilbey through the open country. The Benjamites said, we are defeating them as before. So God was using this kind of weird wickedness to kind of like actually lead the Benjamites into a false sense of pride. Right? But the Israelites said, let us flee and draw them away from the city to the highway. So all the men of Israel got up from their place and took their battle position at Bel Tamar, while the Israelites in ambush charged out of their places west of Gibeah. Then 10,000 choice men from all of Israel made a frontal assault against Gibeah, and the battle was fierce, but the Benjamites did not know that disaster was about to strike them. The Lord defeated the Benjamite in the presence of Israel, and on that day the Israelites slaughtered 25,100 men of the Benjamites, all armed men. Then the Benjamites realized they had been defeated. The men of Israel had retreated. The men of Israel had retreated before Benjamin because they were confident in the ambush they had set against Gibeah. The men in ambush rose quickly against Gibeah. They advanced and they put the whole city to the sword. The men of Israel had prearranged a signal with the men in ambush when they sent up a great cloud of smoke from the city. The men of Israel would return to battle. And when the Benjamites had begun to strike them down, killing about 30 men in Israel, they said, they're defeated before us, just as we were in the first battle. But when the column of smoke began to go up from the city, Benjamites looked behind them, and the whole city was going up in smoke. The men of Israel returned, and the men of Benjamites were terrified when they realized that disaster had struck them. They retreated before the men of Israel towards the wilderness. But the battle overtook them, and those who came out of those cities slaughtered those between them. They surrounded the Benjamites and pursued them and easily overtook them near Gibeah towards the east. And there were 18,000 men who died from Benjamin. All were warriors, but the Benjamites turned and fled towards the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon, and the Israelites killed 5,000 men on the highways. They overtook them at Gittim and struck 2,000 more dead. Then all the Benjamites who died that day were 25,000 armed men, all warriors, but 600 men escaped into the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon and stayed there for a month. The men of Israel turned back against the other Benjamites and killed them with the sword, the entire city, the animals, everything that remained. They also burned down all the cities that remained. So, let's go to chapter, come on, where you at? Chapter 21. Verse 1 says, the men of Israel had sworn an oath to Mizpah, none of us would give his daughter to the Benjamites in marriage. So the people went to Bethel and sat there before God until evening. They wept loudly and bitterly and cried out, why, Lord God of Israel, has it occurred that one of the tribes is missing in Israel today? Now, again, I always find these questions funny with them when they are in the depths of rebellion against God, sinful rebellion. Verse 4, the next day the people got up early and built an altar there. They offered burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. The Israelites asked, who of all of the tribes of Israel didn't come out to the Lord with the assembly? For a great oath had been taken that anyone who did not come to the Lord at Mizpah would certainly be put to death. But the Israelites had compassion on their brothers, the Benjamites, and said, today a tribe has been cut off from Israel. What should we do? What should we do about wives for the survivors? We've sworn to the Lord not to give them any of our daughters as wives. They asked, which city among the tribes of Israel didn't come out to the Lord at Mizpah? And it turned out that no one from Jabesh Gilead had come out to the camp and the assembly. For when the people were counted, no one was there from the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead. Jabesh Gilead. All right, verse 10. The congregation sent 12,000 brave warriors there and commanded them, go kill the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead with the sword, including women and children. This is what you should do, completely destroy every male, as well as every female who has not slept with a man. They found among the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead 400 young women who had not had sexual relations with a man, and they brought them to the camp of Shiloh in the land of Canaan. Now, what is interesting about this is there are going to be times. Notice he said that they killed women and children. This is not something God told them to do, but keep this in mind that remember everything is wrong here. Now, what is interesting is that remember when we started off in the book of Judges, one of the problems that they did not wipe out the pagans. God had told them to wipe out, annihilate the pagans. So now, for over 400 years later, we see that they're wiping out their own people who are pagans. Their own Israelites that are pagan. They're wiping them out. But they didn't wipe out whom God told them to wipe out. So in other words, it's all messed up. This is one of the things that the book of Judges is telling us. It's all messed up. Verse 13, the whole congregation sent a message of peace to the Benjamites who were in the rocks of Rimmon. The Benjamin returned at that time, and Israel gave them the women who had kept alive from Jabesh Gilead. But there were not enough of them. And the people had compassion on Benjamin because the Lord had made this gap in the tribe of Israel. The elders of the congregation said, what should we do about wives for those who are left? since the women of Benjamin have been destroyed. They said there must be heirs for the survivors of Benjamin, so that the tribe of Israel would not be wiped out. But we can't give them our daughters as wives, for the Israelites have sworn anyone who gives a wife to the Benjamite is cursed. They also said, look, there is an annual festival to the Lord at Shiloh, which is north of Bethel, east of the highway that goes up from Bethel to Shechem, south of Lebanon. Then they committed to the Benjamites. Then they commanded the Benjamites, go hide in the vineyards, watch, and when you see a young woman of Shiloh come out to perform the dances, each of you leave the vineyards to catch a wife for yourself from the women of Shiloh and go to the land of Benjamin. And when their fathers and brothers come to us to protest, we will tell them, show favor to them, since we did not get enough wives for each of the men in battle. You didn't actually give the women to them, so you're not guilty of breaking your oath. Be careful of people who always kind of work around, try to always find loopholes, what they call in truth. Now remember, none of this in a sense was of God anyway. This was all messed up because of their sinful. Another thing is, there was an old movie. Okay, there was an old movie. I can't even think of his name. I can't think of his name, but I think it came out in maybe the 50s or the 60s, and it had this same kind of storyline where they kind of switched it, where the women would, I think, chase the men and catch them. Now I say that on a sidebar note, that many people in Hollywood who were Jewish took a lot of themes from the Bible. So if you kind of go back, I cannot think of this movie now, but it was one of the scenes was exactly this, but switched around. And so here they're telling them, look, we're not going to give you any of our daughters. However, if you hide when they come to dance, you go and grab them, and then they'll be your wife. Then, guess what? We're not going to protest because we didn't actually give you the wives. Okay. Verse 23. The Benjamites did this and took the number of the women they needed for the dances they caught. They went back to their own inheritance, rebuilt their cities, and lived in them. And at that time, each of the Israelites returned from there to his own tribe and family. Each returned there to his own inheritance. In those days, there was no king. Everyone did whatever he wanted. And again, the old King James said everyone did what was right in his own eyes. So this period, now as it's recorded, we're going to get into Ruth, which next time, which would be a part of the Judges. And then when we get into Samuel, that is still going to be the period of the Judges. We get more into that later. The point, I think, here, what we see most with the book of Judges here is just how incredibly wicked the people had become. Which we don't know why, since they had the law of God. And keep this in mind, this is after they had the law of God. But we see just how bad can be. All right, guys, we're going to get into the book of Ruth in the next study. I'll see you then.